Hey, Cody.
Hey, Aaron, how are you?
Good. Hey, everyone. This is Mind, Money, and Muscle. This is a series of discussions about being mentally, financially, and physically resilient. And my name is Aaron Filipi. I'm a good friend of Cody Fowler, founder of Fowler Financial. You look good. You look like you're resilient today.
Thank you. Thank you. Been getting some sun here in hot but beautiful Arizona.
It got down to what, 100 today? Is that the low or?
Yeah, it was a cool 100, little reprieve off the 110 sweltering heat we've been having, but it's good.
Yeah, typical August. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit more about something money related, and specifically working through the nuances of a mortgage note deal. And to set this up, I wonder, recently your team completed a larger deal. I wonder if you could walk us through some of the interesting nuances of that and how you navigated them, and maybe start with the timeline. Are we talking, is a larger deal a 3-month deal? Is it 3 years? Start with that.
Yeah, it's a great question because it's not even so much necessarily the size of the deal. It's kind of the once you get into a deal and how nuanced and how many complexities you run into that you don't necessarily know off the bat. But in this case, it was a larger deal and it required more deliberate, concentrated due diligence because of the dollar size. So it did take a long time for us to get comfortable with things. But a typical deal may be, 2, 3, 4 weeks. In this case, the deal actually it kind of played out over the course of a good 4, 5, 6 months. So over the course of that time, we had a lot of twists and turns, and be happy to go into some of the nuances of that and how they differ from our typical deals.
Well, yeah, I mean, and just so for context, I mean, are we talking for anyone who doesn't know anything about mortgage notes, right? So are we talking, is this $100,000? Are we talking north of $1 million? What's typically a kind of what would you consider a larger deal?
Yeah, so in the first lien space, and it's important to differentiate because if you're talking second liens, a larger deal might be 50 or 100 or 150,000. For a senior lien or a first position lien, a larger deal, it tends to be kind of anything over a few $100,000. And in this case, it was a $3.6 million note, just one note. Now that's not necessarily a large transaction for a lot of hedge funds, and but for a single note, if you're seeing a $50 million deal, which isn't that unusual for larger funds, that would be a few hundred notes generally. But one note, you've got potentially a lot of concentration risk. So, but that is, you're right. Relatively speaking, what's a larger deal? A larger deal is kind of anything over a few 100,000, half a million would be a decent sized single loan. So they certainly fit in that category.
Okay. And with that size, okay, so that helps. With that size, are there a number of lawyers involved? I mean, talk about the team. Is it your team as well as another team of 5 to 10 people who are working on this and trying to navigate all the nuances?
Yeah, for sure. Because for me to think that my opinion, my assessment, my due diligence, my analysis alone is going to suffice on a deal that size would be, I would say arrogant. And bringing in the opinion of other veteran note investors, certainly a team that has legal background, uh, title background, value, certainly valuation folks, and we can get into all of that. But absolutely, there's the internal team that looked at this, and then we had to bring in outside resources to say, okay, I didn't spend the last 20, 30 years on title. I'm not an attorney. What are the considerations? Where are the blind spots that we might have that you can kind of fill in those gaps and make sure that we really dotted all the I's, crossed the T's on the deal. So yeah, there's probably at least a dozen people involved before we ended up funding the deal.
Interesting. Okay. So blind spots. I just can't leave that alone. what was at least one thing that came up where you just could never have planned for?
Boy, never have planned for. Well, with this particular deal, and kind of in the line of blind spots is I just knew because of the borrower's income and being related to the cannabis industry, that was one thing that I couldn't have imagined at the outset that I would learn as much as I did about that industry, because there's a reason, with cannabis not being federally legal, Schedule 1 drug, how is the banking sector set up to accommodate somebody with a residential loan that derives their income from cannabis? So I would have never thought that I would be having a call with the Bureau of Cannabis Control, the BCC. I didn't even know what that was. I know that existed, but there is a Bureau of Cannabis Control, and they pen some of the legislation, and they know most of the major players in the industry. So that was one area of our due diligence, way beyond just a traditional approach. Like, hey, we're going to get a broker price opinion or an appraisal, and we're going to get a title search, and all of those normal, right down the middle of the fairway type of due diligence items.
Wow. Okay. So, and it having a cannabis element to it, that created some challenges, I guess, maybe, or I mean, it just obviously made it different. Did it make it more difficult from a financial standpoint? I mean, was it, as far as getting the money, the necessary investments and that sort of thing?
Yeah, certainly, because there are some folks that it could be just sort of philosophically, you might not agree with anybody that's in the cannabis business. You might associate the cannabis business with bad apples. I mean, there's certainly, even though there's only, I believe, 16 states that have legalized marijuana, whether it be for medicinal or adult or recreational use, there's still that perception. It's very interesting, actually, Aaron, because it's like, I think at some point, the cannabis use and alcohol will somewhat be in a similar category. It certainly is moving in that direction. So, but nonetheless, if we're syndicating a deal where we have outside investors participating in the investment, and somebody says, oh my goodness, marijuana, cannabis, they may have certain feelings about it. So, and that's how lenders are today. And so this type of loan, and folks in the cannabis business, and we're not talking about a loan to expand the grow operation or the retail cannabis business. We're talking about a single family residence, primary residence, their home, but that's just the nature of their industry, their career. So I think there's very interesting possibilities for folks that spend the time like we did and understand this business, and where folks are good operators, like our borrower, and you can get comfortable and work through that and take the time. That's really the key here, is doing some deep dive thinking and getting to know what is what about the industry, about the borrower, and not just saying, okay, cannabis, oh yeah, we wouldn't touch that, because that's where a lot of people's heads are at today. And that's not how we approached it. But that's also, I've said for a long time, that's how we have a very profitable approach to note investing, is we're not just down the middle of the fairway, like this is, everybody understands it, everybody would hit this deal. We say, okay, where are some of the off, the fringe opportunities where it might require a little deeper dive to get comfortable, and some outside consultation like we just were referencing. That to me is exciting and it's profitable.
Got it. So it's not, so because it wasn't, necessarily what you call a fairway deal, it didn't make it any riskier necessarily, right? It's just different.
That's right. I mean, to me, I think that there's a certain level of risk taking that is rewarded across the board, but it's kind of like Richard Branson. His approach is he always wants to know what is the downside. Really assess the downside, and if you get comfortable with the downside, then you may proceed. But that's what we wanted to look at. Is it's kind of like Warren Buffett's number one rule: don't lose money. So we looked at every category, every way, every angle of how could this deal go south? How are we protected? What do we really need to spend the time on to understand it? And then at the end of the day, if you've assessed the risks and you've gotten comfortable and you've kind of preemptively addressed those risks, then I don't think it is any more risky. I think there's a great way to construct a portfolio where you've got some right down the middle, those fairway deals, and then you've got some fringe deals. And over the long term, I think you're going to generate outsized returns, very strong risk-adjusted returns if you've got a combination of the two in the right balance.
But so this makes a lot of sense. So anyone who is watching, who is kind of maybe on the cusp of a bigger deal, maybe they're a note buyer themselves, are maybe one or two nuggets of advice you could have for someone who is considering either getting into the note business or considering kind of upping their game to be and work on these bigger deals. What would you offer? Maybe a couple things.
Well, I mean, I think it's, at least for us, I'll just speak for, my personal philosophy, which is, we've been at this for 10 years and certainly refining the existing process and the existing buy box and doing more of the same is great. But I like, how Tony Robbins kind of uses the concept of if you're not growing, then you're dying. You're not, you're shrinking. So we're always trying to up the game, right? That's an important part of what we do. But for us, I think it's also about just continually building the skill set, right? It's always trying to learn more, ask great questions, get a team around you that to where it's like Les Brown talks about, if you're the smartest guy or gal in the room, you're in the wrong room. You got to really surround yourself with people. And that's what I love to do is I don't like to necessarily go and talk about like what I know in the note business. I really, a great conversation for me is when I'm asking somebody questions and they're telling me something that I've never heard of or never thought of. And it's, I think that's a fantastic way to not tout yourself as an expert because, John C. Maxwell will talk about, he says, look, he kind of poo-poos the term expert because the expert stops asking questions. They stop listening. They just are talking about what they know. They're an authority on the space, and there's nothing that they are going to learn, right? And that's dangerous. I think it's dangerous in our space. So constant learning. I mean, that's kind of the philosophy. That's a culture that we really foster within. And that's why we've continually gotten excited about new opportunities. Like we've never done this before, or we've done this, but this is just a little different and bigger. And so I think that's part of it. But, just real quickly, going back to like the foundation of any deal is you have to understand the value of the property. You have to understand the paper. So, we sometimes call it 4 the 5 P's. They're the people involved. There's the property. There's the people. There's the profitability. And so really digging into each of those areas, the people is generally the borrower. So who is the borrower? How do you understand them? I built a great rapport with our borrower on this deal. And the property, we had 2 appraisals and really beat that up in a big way, understood the market like you wouldn't believe. So that's drilling down, understanding everything about that market. How many homes are typically for sale? How many, so what's the inventory? How many homes are currently on the market? What's the volatility of the market? In a COVID environment like this, you would want to know, if you were buying a note and you were really trying to understand the value of a property, you wouldn't want to just look at the last 6 months or have some projection about the next 6 months. You'd want to say, okay, when's the last time we had this level of uncertainty in the market, and probably go back to like the Great Recession. Say, what happened in 2008? What happened in 2009? Like, did this market get crushed, or was it fairly stable? And you'd want to be talking to the right people, right? Not somebody that just got their realtor's license and was getting their feet wet in the market, but the veteran in that market. So we found that person. This individual owned basically 80% of the market as a realtor. They were the authority. They knew everything about this market. So we wanted to know the value. We went to them. They knew this street, knew this property. We picked their brain for several hours. I mean, going back to discussion about the team, very important. So that was just the valuation piece. I mean, there was the title, there was the insurance. We had so we knew that GenStar insured the property, but we saw the policy. There were a couple of things that we wanted to know. We wanted to know that the borrower was insured. We also wanted to know that the lender was the lost payee or additional insured. It had a mortgagee clause, all of that, basic stuff. But what about replacement costs? A $3.6 million mortgage that has a $2 million insurance policy, that doesn't line up. So they could say that the replacement costs are $2 million on the property all day long. That's valued at $4.6 million because there's a lot of land, and that doesn't make its way into a replacement cost, right? The house burns down, you still have the value of the land. That is not acceptable for a note investor that really is covering their bases. So we went and we said, listen, you need to increase the policy $1.5 million before we buy the note. And through a lot of follow-up and phone calls and encouraging, that for the sake of the borrower, because the borrower was underinsured. The current lender that we bought the note from was underinsured. And we said, this is a condition of us buying the note. It's just one of those I's that needed to be dotted, T's that needed to be crossed. So that was a little bit about the insurance, a little bit about the valuation, a little bit about I want to just make a point about the borrower as well. So why would you care that the borrower has triplets that are 3 years old and a fourth daughter that's 4 or 5 that likes to ride horses, right? Like, what relevance does that have to buying a note? It boils down to, what is their motivation to stay and pay? And is this a kind of a somewhat forever home, or is it a luxury condo in Miami that's a second home that they don't care about losing, right? It's the psychology of the borrower. Very, very key. And if you put yourself in the shoes of that borrower and you say, how important is this home to me? What will I do to make sure that I pay the obligations and stay in this home? There's that level of thinking about the investment that is beyond what a lot of people will do. But it goes back to, again, the deal size. Got to understand it.
I get the sense that you could talk about this for a while.
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to be long-winded, but I'm passionate about, really understanding these deals, because I mean, it's this is what we get paid to do. We get paid to think. We get paid to, and this is a little bit exploratory. There's a lot of kind of almost project management. You have to check all these boxes, and then if you're investing alongside other people's capital, if you are responsible for investor capital, you don't take these things lightly.
Right. Well, you certainly shouldn't, and obviously you don't. So, well, I feel like that kind of wraps it up a little bit. I mean, I think again, you could probably talk many hours about this deal because it sounds like there were, if you're talking about triplets and cannabis and all this kind of stuff, there's a lot to talk about. But I think we should probably wrap it up there. So I appreciate your time, Cody. And certainly everyone who's watching and all the Faller Financial fans. Check out more details and insights on fallerfinancial.com. And by all means, if you have a note to sell, go to fallerfinancial.com/contact. And until then, Cody, thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. And to everyone else, be good to your mind and your money and your muscles.